I heard you guys talking, and it sounds like many of you know each other, which is fantastic because this is gonna be, all right, so I have two choices, right? I can either teach you guys like I do my undergraduate students, which will be good because then you can take a nap and, at the end I'll wake you up. But because you guys seem to interact and know each other a little bit, at least many of you do, this is an open forum. Okay, and in fact, we're going to begin by asking questions at the beginning, and we will go until you guys are done with the questions, and then I have some slides if we need them. Okay, now we are going to get to them. I shouldn't say that. We are going to get to them. But I do want this to be as interactive as possible because this isn't about me telling you what negotiation is. My goodness. Everybody here, I assume, everybody here, many of you are licensed negotiators, and everybody here are negotiators. And so you guys will have questions. There may be some stuff you don't think I know what I'm talking about. Let's talk about that. And at the end of the day, I hope that a few of you will come away from this, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. A few of you will come away from this going, I will never see the world the same again. For others, it was a great, Cafe Rio. It may not stick, what I'm saying may not stick, and that's totally okay. But having said that, this material is transformational, or it can be. So, let's ask. Let me give you a quick overview. As she mentioned, I got my undergraduate in poli-sci. I started out in engineering. Several calculus professors told me that I probably ought to look elsewhere for a career. And so I ended up in political science, and I did ROTC, and was a nuclear missile officer, combat crew commander. And for some reason, they didn't like mistakes as a combat crew commander and nuclear missile officer, something about blowing up the world accidentally. So there are certain things that we can do as part of our negotiation process to create systems that can allow a 22-year-old snot-nosed graduate to protect the world without accidentally blowing it up. There are systems, and we're going to touch on some of those things today. Then I came back to BYU. I joke that after 4 years of military, I felt like I needed more discipline, so I went back to BYU. I did criminal defense. You name them, I represented them. And during that process, I realized as an attorney, especially a criminal defense attorney, you're negotiating from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed. Whether it's with the judges, a trial is a negotiation. You're attempting to persuade a group of people that your client is more right than the other. It's persuasion. And then I had the opportunity to run several businesses, start and run several businesses. I heard a few of you talking about kind of the business machinations that are going on. Somebody mentioned that they were just starting a business and things like that. Or many of you, that's what you do, right? You own your own business. So from that perspective, I've been there. I have those battle scars. Some of them, really successful. Other ventures, not so much. And then I ended up, I had a very serious health problem that required me not to practice anymore. And while I was in that process of recovery, I began to study about negotiation. And that turned into teaching negotiation. And now I actually consult much more than I teach. I do teach at UVU. I am on the advisory board for the business school, which is a fabulous opportunity to help students. But in addition, I consult with businesses, and I'll touch on an experience probably today that I had just yesterday as part of my consulting. And so I now have that perspective. And so I hope some of those things will help you see that these things come from my experience. Some of them are, have been taught for generations. Many of the things that I'll teach and we'll touch on today actually are fairly new. They've been a lot of scientific understanding of negotiation has come within the last 20 or 30 years. And so it's evolved into a different type of way to negotiate. Harvard, for instance, for years taught a very interesting, different, at that time, standard way of negotiating. And I had an opportunity to be selected and go and take their master negotiation course. It's completely different than what they used to do. So we're going to touch on some of that. And in fact, one of the major points that we'll touch on today is something that was absolutely irrelevant 30 or 40 years ago. Okay, so before we dive in, does anybody have any burning question? How do I negotiate X? Oh, and let me just add this in. How many of you have children? How many of you are married? How many of you have significant relationships with somebody? Are a child? Parents, dealing with parents? Then you negotiate.
Yeah, we lose.
What's that?
We lose most of the time.
Yes, that's right. And for what it's worth, my wife has the credentials of a master negotiator. She legitimately is. She's an executive in the healthcare industry, and she's negotiated billion-dollar deals. So I'm not even the best negotiator in my house. She tells me a lot, hey, and she often says, don't pull that with me. I know what you're doing. And I do it better. So, but we do. From the time we wake up, literally, our relationships with our significant others or those around us, we are negotiating. We're attempting to either persuade or be persuaded and to have outcomes that we would like to have because we think that that would be beneficial. So when we're talking about it, we're going to try to narrow in specifically on real estate transactions, but it is much more broad than that, and we'll bring in that context as well. So are there any burning questions that you may have? Ooh, we have one.
Sorry, I'm just in the middle of a deal right now, so this class was like perfect timing.
Okay. And what was your name?
Shauna.
Shauna. Okay.
So I have a buyer who feels like it's a buyer's market because of the news, even though it's not really a buyer's market, and wants to consistently put in offers that are incredibly unrealistic and then negotiate on their behalf. And so my question is, our job is to have their best interests in mind, which is to get the lowest price, but when you know it's not going to be taken seriously or that it's a highly offensive offer, how do you kind of work both with your client and with the people that you're negotiating with?
Now, we could spend 2 hours easily on that question, just peeling back the onion of that question. But I'm not going to spend the whole 2 hours, but let's dive into a few of these components. There are a few things that I teach very specifically. One of them is, let's touch on 3. Number 1, it's really important as you're negotiating that you are framing things in the proper way. Okay? One of the most important things that we've learned from the new research that I just mentioned is this concept of how we actually make decisions is not the way we think we do. We think that we make these decisions based on our, pros and cons list, and, we very cool-headed. Yeah, that's how we do it. That's how we justify it. We make these decisions based on our gut most of the time. And the bigger the decision, the more it comes from the gut. I don't want to say that we make it emotionally because I think that that's too narrow. That's too easy. But we do make, and very quickly, what the science tells us is, we are sensory machines. We hear, we see, we touch, we smell. All of that information is brought into our brains in such large quantities, there's no way that we could ever process it if we did it all consciously. So all of that information we are internalizing subconsciously. So guess where the decisions that we make are? They're being made subconsciously because that's where the great data source is. Our brains have fantastic ways of creating and seeing patterns based on this overwhelming amount of data. And generally speaking, these decisions are being made based on those patterns that our brains do. Now what happens is then they're brought up to our consciousness, and our consciousness will then make a justification. What's the justification? Well, it's whatever it thinks fits the pattern. So that person has heard all of these things over and over again, and it's in their subconscious. And their gut tells them that they think they can get a higher deal. Well, talk about a whiplash of an economy in the last several months, right? Things have changed. But they haven't changed enough, especially in this market, as I was talking earlier. So one of the things that's incredibly important in being a great negotiator is to, and this is my term, you must understand the brutality of your reality. And you guys are advocate for your customers or your clients, and it's clear that you need to frame the argument. So what you're doing when you're framing is you're taking that subconscious information and you're putting it in a conscious way, in a way that makes sense to them. You can mislead them. By the way, when we get done, you will have the capacity to go steal money from old people. Okay? There's ethical problems with that. It's not a good long-term solution. But I'm giving you some really important things that you can then manipulate others with. This isn't a case of manipulating. This is a way of presenting things in a way. So I would tell you, frame it so that they can understand the true brutality of their reality. One of the most important things, in fact, I was just teaching this yesterday. I have a phrase that I use in my teaching that says, this is very scientific and it's kind of highfalutin, so just be patient with me. Don't cross the crazy line. Okay? There is science behind it, I promise. But that's true. Don't cross the crazy line. And what happens is it Shannon? Shauna. Shauna, when your customer has you submit something that is clearly across the crazy line, that hurts your reputation, which is, part of the deal sometimes. But it also will come back on them if they get known in however it is, maybe not in this particular transaction, but in many, many others. You cross the crazy line, everybody knows that you'll cross the crazy line, and that's who you are. So it actually damages you in long-term relationships, whether it's business or personal, when you cross that crazy line. Very quickly, here's the crazy line. The crazy line is not when you are told no. Totally okay to be told no. In fact, I'll probably show you a video here at the end, a few-minute video, and I actually talk about the crazy line there. But it's when the other person gets up and leaves, and the negotiation's terminated. You don't want that, unless you come to terms and realize that there's no terms to come to. But you don't want to extend an offer where they go, you're not even in the same universe, we're done. Don't do that. That's not helpful. And the way I would frame that for your client is, it's not helpful to you if we don't even have a chance to negotiate. Yeah. Now, what did I just do? I just framed an argument, right? Taking subconscious information, that you have as a professional realtor and having you frame it so that they can understand in their subconscious understanding that they need to be reasonable. And in fact, it's okay to be unreasonable. It's just not okay to be crazy. Okay. Let's see, was that 2 or 3? I said 3. Let's see, don't cross the crazy line. What was the first thing? Reality, brutality of your reality, and the other is framing. So we did cover the 3. So framing is really important in a negotiation, and that is your job. You frame several different times. And by the way, obviously you guys know this, but it's not just the negotiation with the opposing realtor. The first thing you have to do is negotiate with your client. And oftentimes that's the trickier of the negotiations. How do you create some differentiation in the market? What makes you different from everybody else? As well as making sure that you have let's call it a complementary capacity to interact with each other. In other words, I don't want to mess with that jerk, so I'm not going to represent him. Has anybody? I know that this is amazing. I know that nobody's going to say yes, but have any of you ever represented an unreasonable client before?
Today?
Yeah. So that's the first negotiation. So as you can see, it kind of multiplies upon itself. So are those helpful at all?
Yeah, they are.
Any follow-up?
I think for me, it's figuring out a way to frame it for them, because I've done this CMA showing them what the market around the house they're offering on is, and I mean, it's just, they don't live in reality, you know.
So the frame may not be, hey, here are the comps, or here's whatever's going on in the market. The frame may be, I told you I was going to tell you about a consulting gig that I just had yesterday. So I had one of my employees try to push on me to go nuclear on a negotiation with somebody else. And it didn't take me very long to realize the reason why is because they had a personal grudge. So I had to help that person, without firing him, to understand that personal grudges don't have a place in this negotiation. Now, there may be others where it's actually appropriate, but it wasn't yesterday. And so it didn't help me to say, you know, I can rationalize with the best of them, but it wasn't a rational argument. The dude just wanted to punch the other guy in the nose because the other guy had punched him, you know, months ago, psychologically speaking. And so I ended up framing it in a way to tell him, this is a quote from me, you are being vindictive, and that's not the way we resolve these types of problems. When I framed it in that way, now I was very confrontational, and negotiation is not about confrontation, or it doesn't have to be, but in that case it needed to be. So my point with you is that frame may not be, hey, this is the real market. It may be, if you do this, we won't even go to the table to be able to actually get this out. If you want this house, I'm telling you, that's not the way.
Thank you.
Okay, and so it's a completely different argument. Can you see that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay. Any other questions? This is your chance. And we'll get into the other stuff, but I want to make sure that we just come out of the gate so that I can help in any way I can. Okay. Here we go. So we're going to talk about 2 specific things. We're going to talk about, I know this is a difficult thing, finding creative solutions, right? You guys are in a very, very competitive field with each other, as well as other options that homeowners may have, whether they sell or don't sell. So we're going to talk about, in my experience dealing with your industry, and by the way, I have done several financial transactions when I was practicing, so I think I have a pretty good idea. I have gone through the hell of buying homes a few times, and so I think I understand it from that perspective too, so let's see how that goes. But finding creative solutions I find to be helpful to in your industry. So we're going to try that. And then we're going to talk about empathy. I'm going to waste your time talking about the fuzzy, soft importance of empathy. So at least you'll get the nap during that part. Okay, so here we go. Bold actually stands for something. It's just not bravado from me. I actually use it as a term. Now, being bold is important. You don't get anything that you don't negotiate, generally speaking. But I use it to help understand and give some structure to actually how you become a master negotiator. So I break it into 4 parts. Understanding behaviors, both your behavior as well as the behavior of the person with whom you're negotiating. Both of those are important. And then you have that thing in the middle called your relationship between each other. That's also important to understand. Objectives. And that's what we're going to be talking about now with creativity. You have to have an objective of your negotiation. Now, you probably have one of 2 things. In fact, I can't really think of anything beside these 2. You either have an opportunity that you're trying to maximize, purchase of a home, or you have a problem that needs a solution, possibly the selling of your home, or some combination. When you have opportunities, without question, you are going to have some obstacles. The negotiation process is how you overcome those obstacles. If you have an opportunity, if you have an obstacle, a solution that needs to be found, there are always opportunities within the problem. And it's those opportunities that create the solution. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. Leverage. All right. Does anybody have any idea about the definition of leverage? I've been teaching this a long time. Go ahead.
So just a guess.
Go, please.
It's basically like what you have in your back pocket that's going to help you get to what you want.
That is a fantastic summary of leverage. Trying to define it's really difficult. You go to it's almost a circular definition when you look in the dictionary. Leverage is the use of leverage. Okay, well, that doesn't help me out much. But that's exactly right. It's using secondary influence to persuade a primary purpose. So actually, that summary, it's being recorded. I'm going to use that with your permission from now on. That's a fantastic definition.
Just give me all the royalties.
There you go. You know, there's a Supreme Court justice once said, you know, I may not be able to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. Leverage is kind of that same way. Really hard to define, but you know it when you see it, right? Leverage can come at the end of a gun, right? You're using a secondary resource to influence in a primary situation. And when we get to empathy, you understanding who you're negotiating with, truly understanding them, you will see things bubble up that you would have never understood. Now you're understanding how you can steal money from old people here, right? Things will bubble up so that you can then address their true concerns, which may be completely away from what they're telling you. I just gave away empathy. I'm sorry, because I want you guys to think that empathy is such a waste of time. It's really not. And that's one of the reasons why, is because you begin to use leverage in a non-manipulative way to bring a solution. So that's leverage. And then D, for decisions and discipline, well, that's just the nuts and bolts of negotiation. Has anybody ever heard the word BATNA before? Thank goodness. That is a professor's term. Here's what it stands for. Ready? Do not write this down. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So it took a professor all of those words to say, what's your plan B? So BATNA is one of those terms. Understanding your reservation point and your aspiration point. Those are the nuts and bolts of negotiation that you're taught if you go. And by the way, how many of you have actually been trained in negotiation at a university or? We've got 3, but usually they're just embedded within another class, right? Like a sales class or something, or was it actually a negotiation course? Oh, fantastic. That's very rare. Now think about this. I told you negotiate in every relationship that you have. So we really do it every day. And I'm sure you took the class because of professional reasons. So we're just winging it. We spend our lives winging a tool that if you understand it, what I said at the beginning, you'll never see the world the same again. It's a shame. In fact, the reason why I'm teaching at UVU is because I saw this as a problem. And I went to the dean. I was on the advisory board. I went to the dean of UVU and I said, we've got a problem. We're not teaching negotiation. Well, yeah, we've got it in a sales class. I'm like, so if I'm not a sales major, I'm not going to learn one of the most important tools that I could use in my entire life? He's like, well, what do you want to do about it? I said, I don't know, you're the dean. And he said, well, this is what you're going to do. You're going to figure out a solution, because that's what deans do. And he had me research, well, who does teach negotiation in college? They teach it in law school. I had a formal negotiation course in legal negotiation, which is not the same. They do teach it in many business schools at the graduate level, but there's only a few universities that teach negotiation as a course at the undergraduate level. I went to Baylor, who's like the gold standard for undergraduate negotiation. They have every one of their business school, they're mandated to take a negotiation course. And I don't know who had that vision, but it should have been coming from their fundraising department. Because think about this. As a self-interested university, if I make sure that everybody that I can takes a negotiation class as an undergraduate, they're going to make more money. And then I can go after them to pay some of that to the university. So it's completely self-interested. I don't know that it is particularly in Baylor's case, but it should be. So I went back to my dean and I said, well, Baylor kind of has the model. I said, I really don't like some of the techniques they use because they use kind of the old school version. And he said, well, guess what? You're teaching from now on. I'm like, that was a stupid move by me. So now I teach generally once a year. I can at least get them to only have me teach once a year so that I can then teach at a corporate level and also in situations like this. So it's critically important. It's a skill that's highly underutilized and misunderstood. So that's kind of the idea behind all this. Oops, wrong way. So let's talk about this understanding obstacles and finding opportunities. Has anybody ever, obviously you know who Steve Jobs is, has anybody ever heard this concept of reality distortion field? Shanna, you shake your head yes.
Yes, but I'm just like such a basic level, so I don't know.
Well, you did so good with leverage. Do you want to take a shot at it?
Well, I think everybody's reality is different, so then the distortion or the distortion field may be like, what's the actual reality and what's what people think.
Ironically enough, it's the opposite of that. I know, it sounds like that's what it would be. Steve Jobs had his idea of what reality should be, and he was so charismatic, persuasive, obsessive, that he would then distort everybody else's reality to his. And he would create products that he thought everybody would want if they knew. Now that takes a lot of confidence, right? So his way of creating a vision of what he thought and then persuading others to follow his lead. By the way, that's called the definition of leadership. Two quick asides on that. Leadership and management. Very, very quickly. By the way, I consult in business management as well, obviously. You lead people, you manage things. If you think you're managing people and leading things, you got everything backward. People have to be persuaded, things have to be managed. Okay, just an aside. And which obviously goes to negotiation. Okay, so he would lead people in the way he thought was best. Now, he would listen, kind of. This is what one of his, a member of the board of directors of Steve Jobs, of Apple, said about him. The reality distortion field was a personal refusal to accept limitations that stood in the way of his ideas, to convince himself that any difficulty was surmountable. This field was so strong that he was able to convince others that they too could achieve the impossible. So this is what has... The reason why I show this right at the beginning is because you guys live in a very... I've mentioned this. You guys live in a very difficult industry. Because other people can do what you can do unless you do something different. I want to give you a story that's personal on what I mean by that. My wife and I had a second marriage. We've been married 11 years now, coming up on 11 years. And after we got married, I sold my place. I moved in with my wife, and we decided we wanted to get a house together. We looked and 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 looked. One day, my wife comes up to me. This is July 3rd. And she says, I think I found it. I said, okay. So she pulls up the listing. And I'm like, we were flying out to Boston on July 5th. We knew that house would probably not be around on July 6th. Right? So she says, let's see if we can go see it. It's July 3rd. We're flying out on July 5th. Do you guys see a problem here? So the first thing is we had to negotiate a way for us to see the house on July 4th. She talks to our realtor, does her magic to him, and then he was able to actually get us a viewing on July 4th. So that was miracle number one. So we walk in the door, and by the way, what's the worst thing your spouse can say when we walk in the door?
I love it.
Yes, this is the house. Now We have a what I would call a friendly rivalry between my wife and I. I graduated twice from BYU. She graduated twice from the University of Utah. We both graduated in poli-sci and have our law degrees. And I'm like, what did you teach? What did you learn at the U? We just lost our leverage. Our leverage is what right there? Us not liking it and walking away. I love it. This is it. Realtor standing right there. So we look around and we're like, oh, this. And I'm like, yeah, this really is the house. So we decide, okay, this was so the 5th was a Friday. So we knew that if we didn't put in an offer on the 5th, we may not be able to do it. So as soon as we landed in Boston, we submitted an offer. We were on the phone with our realtor before we got on the plane. As soon as this is when couldn't text back then on the phone on the plane. So as soon as we land, as we're driving to the hotel, we're working out the offer, what we're going to give. Now we didn't offer. We actually gave something below market value, which back then is not uncommon, but with this house, it was so unique, we expected people, and they did. They came in at full value. We actually came in below. So how'd we get the house? So we're at the hotel, getting ready to hit send on the fax. And my wife turns to me and she says, if we hit send, it's our house. In other words, do we really want to do this? And I'm thinking, there are those you grads being all overconfident again. No, I didn't say that. I was just poking some fun. I said, why do you say that? And she said, if I write a letter, we'll get the house. What's that?
I think this is not recommended.
Well, let's just see how this goes. And I said, okay. Well, so we hit fax, or we hit send, it faxes, they get the offer. She writes a letter to accompany it with the offer. What's that?
It's called a love letter, I think.
So I would have never done this. And by the way, I walked in the house and said, where's the man cave? And then I was done, right? Where's the kitchen? How far is the distance between the man cave and a fridge? And I was done. This is what my wife said in her letter. She said, now, let me backfill this. This is what we knew about the house. It was built specifically by a contractor for himself and his wife. This was their dream home. It was finished in 2008. He was a contractor. She was a mortgage broker. 2008. Are you seeing a problem here? They ended up getting a divorce, so she's the one that's now selling the house. But it's her dream house. I mean, he built it, but he built it for her. So when my wife, while I was trying to find out the distance between the fridge and the man cave, my wife was looking at the nuances of what she had in the house. How the kitchen was designed and the type of, what is it called, farm style? I mean, you can tell, I have no clue. There was a very specific use that in the kitchen. In the bathroom, or in the bedroom, there was this French frilly stuff. In the back, there was a rose garden. In the front, there were these English English hedges, which I thought were ugly, but I wasn't going to say anything. And she began to touch on those things. And what her point was is, look, I understand whose house this is. I understand why. The way she did it was there was a lot of English influence from England.
That's a good thing.
What's that?
That's a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't understand. I didn't understand. I didn't understand. But she did. And she said, I had an opportunity to go to school at Cambridge. And every weekend we would go into the countryside. And I've seen those influences in your house. It's beautiful. Now, I can't say that I will leave everything in place, that I won't make any changes, but I want you to know I will protect what you've done. Did we get the house? At a lower price than other people? Now, that was unusual. And it's really not, and is that illegal now?
Yeah.
You are not allowed to communicate directly with the, can the realtor express those concerns through the other realtor?
Like this kind of personal thing, because they're afraid of fair housing issues.
Fair housing.
Okay, so you're going to have to get around some of those. But do you understand what, let's at least teach the principle. I'm going to tell my wife she broke the law. Anyway, the point is she did a couple interesting things. Number one, she had the ability to, we're going to talk about empathy in a minute. She had the ability to understand who was selling the house and why. She had held on to that house after the divorce for several years. We bought it in 2011 because she couldn't let it go.
And you knew all of those details before you put your offer in? The divorce?
We did know about the divorce because we asked some people in the neighborhood. We did not know that that's why she couldn't let go of the house. But we did see that it had been listed, and then it was unlisted, and then it was listed again without very much of a variation in the price. So it wasn't so much of a, well, I got to get rid of the house. We made the assumption, and we were right, that she couldn't let it go. And part of it was you could just tell every room was unique. This was not a cookie cutter house, so that was part of it. I mean, we could, the bunk beds, their kids were older, so this was obviously a room for grandkids and that type of thing, right? And broken dreams, unfortunately. And in her case, she needed to know that the house was understood and that it would be everybody wants the house to go to somebody to treat it well. But in this case, it was a little more particular, I guess you'd say. But my wife had the observation, and two things. She made the observation, which was completely oblivious to me. And number two, she had the guts to make the ask, to write the letter. In your industry, and once everybody finds a good idea like that, I'm sure everybody else jumps on it. But it's that type of creativity that can differentiate you with your customers, and hopefully you are customizing or attempting to customize every transaction to make it the most likely to be sold. The easiest way is to drop the price, or, well, either way, right? But there are other nuances in every deal, and that's what I want you to attack. So
And asking I get to call the listing agent and collaborate with the agents. That's one of the secrets is collaboration. What can you do for buyer, seller, et cetera? But what does the seller want? First of all, how can we tailor that offer to it? So
yeah.
I love what I wrote down, understanding the person you're negotiating with, so you can address what's meaningful to them.
Yeah.
You can do it without a love letter.
Yeah.
observing and things like that.
And you did that with one of my clients where
Yeah.
called.
And sometimes the listing agent will share things with me
That they
so
won't share with
really
me.
nice. But you know,
Well, we're going to touch on that in a minute. Yeah, there are multiple negotiations going on at the same time, is exactly what you're saying there. You've got a negotiation with the actual seller, but you also have a negotiation with the other realtor and the mortgage broker and anybody else that might, the community. Like I said, we asked around. So there are multiple components of that. Okay. This is going to give another, well, let me see what we're doing on time. This is a little echoey. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So be patient with it. It's a little echoey. And it's a few minutes long. This comes from Apollo 13. I think this teaches one of the best examples that I've seen in understanding what your resources are so you can formulate the best solution. Okay, so be patient with the sound.
I need a flashlight.
That's not what they have.
That's not what they have up there. Don't
Don't
give me anything they don't have on board.
Get the show on the road. Put them in space, fellas.
Okay, Houston, the quad heater circuit breakers are open. One we're using for forward Omni when the Earth's in the window, and we're switching to aft Omni when we see the moon.
We copy that, 13. Aquarius, we don't want you to make any more waste dumps. Vetting may push you off course.
Christ.
What's up?
No more waste. No more waste dumps.
We're just gonna have to store it. Jack's gonna need some more urine bags.
Okay, Houston, that leaves us with just the computer, which I'm shutting down now.
And that's it.
And that's it.
Just puts the
Just puts the Isaac Newton in the driver's seat.
Sit AM or PM?
AM. Very AM.
Radiator's running a temperature, and none of them has slept since the
Can't order
explosion.
these guys to go to sleep.
Did you sleep up there? Gonna get awful cold in there for those guys.
Gene, we have a situation brewing with carbon dioxide.
We had a CO2 filter problem on the lunar module.
5 filters on the limb.
Which were meant for 2 guys for a day and a half. So I told the doctor,
You're already up to 8 on the gauges. Anything over 15, and you get impaired judgment, blackouts, the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
they take square cartridges.
The ones on the limb are round.
Tell me this isn't a government operation.
It's just using the contingency we've remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole. Rapidly.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we gotta come through. We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this. Using nothing but that. Let's get it organized.
Okay, let's build a filter.
Better get some coffee going too, someone.
Hayes family lives in El Lago, Texas.
Oops. Oh, okay. And that's the main point. So obviously they didn't die, right? And what they come up with is using duct tape and socks and underwear and wire, everything that they had that they could to make that transition of a, literally, what was it, a square peg in a round hole. Every deal that you guys have, I want you to see that image of throwing all of that material on the desk. And I want you to find what material and resources you have for that client and that house. Because every time it will be a little bit different. And understanding those differences, what will set you apart from most other agents. Any questions on that? So now we're going to get into more of the nuts and bolts. So this is a very simple way of understanding how to be more creative, which is what we're talking about ultimately, what I want you to understand is, in order to make a difference, you have to be different. And in order to be different, you have to do things differently. So this is the way to do that. Don't focus on the present. You need to understand what reality is, right? The brutality of it. In that case, if they didn't fix the problem, they were going to have some dead astronauts. Understand the reality of it, but don't dwell on it. For instance, what I heard before was, well, you can't do that. You can't do love letters anymore. Okay, that technique may not work anymore, but does the concept? Can you find a different conduit? That's what I'm talking about. So focus on future possibilities, not the present obstacles. You'll get from here to there in a minute. Create a clear vision and use all of your senses. One of the best techniques that I've seen for this is if you're having a really difficult time in really kind of finding a fix for what you're wanting to do, take 15 minutes, set your watch or your clock, your phone to 15 minutes. You can listen to some music, but nothing else. Close your eyes and walk through the situation. Try to see a solution. Don't try to think a solution. Try to see it. Now, why would I tell you to do that? What am I encouraging you to do by doing that technique? Eyes closed, 15 minutes. And by the way, 15 minutes is an eternity with your eyes closed and not on your phone. Why am I having you do that?
Well, I found it, first of all, it helps you to clear emotions. And then second of all, to think about solutions. You know, rather than just reacting, it gives you some time to think, okay, this is really the right way to approach this.
Yeah, ironically enough, I'm having you turn off your thinking brain, and I'm having you allow your unconscious, your subconscious, allow things to naturally percolate into your consciousness.
I think it's Andy Andrews who says, okay, one of his principles is, I don't know what to do, but if I knew what to do, then it would be this, and then that's where you think through possibilities and create solutions, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm trying to have you do is get over the obstacle and see what it feels like. Do you see what I said? See what it feels like. I didn't say think about it. See, smell, touch what it would feel like if I had the solution. Because then what you'll do is you'll back into it and you'll say, okay, so if I had the solution, and it doesn't even matter what it is. You don't have to be right. In fact, you're going to be 99.999% of the time wrong with whatever that initial thought is. And then you back into it and you say, okay, so if I had that and I'm here, how do I get from here to there? Well, now all the obstacles are going to come up. And then you can try to see if you can weave. You're not going to have a straight line, because if you had a straight line, you wouldn't need to close your eyes and turn off your phone. So you're going to try to find the path, maybe rocky, maybe mountainy, to find that solution. Sometimes the solution's not there. Sometimes it's right in front of your face. And all it takes is, man, I just had an epiphany. When I was an undergraduate, I read this thing for one of my courses. I thought I had forgotten everything I'd ever taken in as an undergraduate. But I remember this. It was a essay about epiphanies, ironically enough. And it talked about the epiphany will often come not when you're pushing for it, but when you back off from it. So really what you're doing, you're closing your eyes and you're creating that distance to allow your magic brain to do its thing. And like I said, sometimes you're going to strike out. Many times you are. But that's your best opportunity to find something. Gain as much information as you can. Pressure, 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 pressure. And then back off, close your eyes. See what that looks like. Once you've worked backward, well, now you're going to iterate forward. And what I mean by iterate, that's what I'm talking about. You're not going to have a direct path. you're going to probably have to change along the way, going, oh, that's not going to work. Let's try this. And it's those multiple small changes, those iterations, that will get you from here to there. Once again, this isn't a foolproof thing. If it was, I'd have a different house. But this is the best way. And then don't be afraid to do hard things. The wealthiest former NFL football player is a realtor. Does anybody know who he is? He made not that much money as a NFL player. His name's Roger Staubach. He's my hero. Not because he's a real estate agent, but I was Roger in the backyard when I was a kid. And he started selling real estate because he wasn't making enough money as a quarterback, and he had like 7 kids. So when he had to stop playing, in fact, I cried that day when he retired because of concussions. And has anybody ever heard of Staubach Realty? And I'm not sure what they call it. It's a huge thing in Texas. It was sold. Who's the big commercial? CBRE. What's that? CBRE. They bought it for $600 million. Probably about 9 or 10 years ago. And he had a phrase that said, there are no traffic lines. Let me make sure I get this right. The extra mile does not have traffic lines. So do the hard things. Pay the price that your peers won't pay. And when I say pay, I don't mean pay off. Right? Once again, we're not stealing money from old people. But you need to, the path is not going to be easy. And I'm not trying to give you a platitude there. But that's an actual path of working harder than everybody, than your peers. And I know that your industry is one where everybody works hard, or most people do. So iterating has to do with thinking and being smarter in it and not just working harder. But you do have to do hard things. So that's a very quick summary of what I teach specifically for creativity. So before we do this, let's take a break if that's okay, and then we'll finish on empathy. I want to show you something. Do you see all these words over here? Yes. If you can't see it when we get done, take a look. I want you to, it may not be apparent, but many of these goals or values are critically important in negotiating. And we're going to talk about the number one there, humility first here when we're talking about empathy. But it's not just that one. Respect, listen, and stay balanced. We're going to talk about that one with empathy. Consistent, honest communication. That is how you negotiate, is through making sure that your language is what you mean. You say what you mean what you say. So I really like that the values as a negotiation expert, have fun. Okay, I'm serious. I want you to be truthful here. It's okay. We're in a closed group. How many of you really, really don't like to negotiate? I mean, seriously. It's okay. Don't like to negotiate. Most of us don't. Because we're having to be confrontational. We may be, and here's the bottom line, because we may be rejected. If you don't like being rejected, it can be really tough. Now, I like to say there are days when I put on my negotiation hat when I am ready for a fight. Like when I was practicing criminal defense, for instance, I would come home with a smile on my face sometimes with the battles that I had to fight. It was enjoyable to be in the ring and to throw and receive punches.
But I think it's also the idea that in a negotiation, there is one side that is going to lose and one side that is going to win. And I think that if we can switch our mind in a way that will not have that kind of very binary result,
You're right.
then it would be easier to negotiate. But if I go in thinking, okay, it's either I win or I lose, then of course I don't like it. I mean, it's
Right.
who would, you know.
The way you have fun is by not having that binary choice of lose or win. Now, I am not a fan of the term win-win. I don't like it. Not because I like to, take somebody out, because it's an excuse for poor negotiating. As long as they think I win, and as long as I get something, it's too easy. We just spend all that time talking about hard things and how to be creative. That's the effort. You're not looking for using some business parlance, you're not looking for the 2x solution to double whatever. You're looking for the 10x or the 100x. Don't settle for the 2x because both of you get to win. You're looking for a 100x for you and maybe a 15x for them, or vice versa. So be careful with win-win, that it's just for shallow victories.
So my question to you on that is, when I first got into real estate, that was sort of my thought was, whoever I can, my client win, the best upper hand. And what I found was that usually when you do that, both parties lose, and nothing happens. And so finding a win-win typically tends to get the best results. So when you say we should do a win-win, is it just because you think we're selling for too low, or?
I want win. I don't want win-win. See what I'm saying?
Right.
And that takes work. Yeah. Being empathetic is making sure that the person with whom you're negotiating has a proper understanding of what the value they get in a deal. Because if they feel like they've lost, you're going to get burned down the road. So, so it's really important that you actually spend some time framing their wins. And we'll touch on that here in just a minute. Okay. So here we go. Empathy. What do you guys think the definition of empathy is?
Understanding the other side?
That's pretty good.
Isn't that sympathy though?
So we're going to touch on the difference here in just a minute. Let's see. I actually have a definition here coming up. Let's take a look. See if this fits. The best way that I've had to let me read this real quick. Empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, feeling with the heart of another. Do you see the reason why this is there rather than some, let's say, generic definition from a dictionary is because I want you to see the subconscious. And how do we gain understanding in our subconscious? Through our senses. I want to reemphasize that, through our senses. So empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that gentle and kind? Isn't that empathy? And what the heck does that have to do with selling houses? That's also empathy. You cut through the crap when you're empathetic. Because people will put up barriers purposely or without an understanding of what they're doing, and you are chasing ghosts. Because you want to do right by whatever the deal is, whether it's your own customer or whether it's the thing you're trying to purchase. And you're chasing ghosts that don't exist because you can't get to what their real reasoning is. So I see empathy as a sword which has to be wielded very carefully, or you'll take money from old people.
I relate to that strongly. I've found a lot of times that's kind of a first step with clients. You have to let them understand that you're empathizing with them, that you're on their team. And I've had clients like push back from me and hide things from me, and even though I'm on their side, you know, and help them understand, I'm trying to lead you through this, like, talk to me.
So why do they mislead the very people that are trying? I know that you've never heard that before unless you have children. Why would they mislead you when you're the person that's trying to help them?
That reminds me of my therapist. I realised I had to stop going when I just paid a lot of money to lie to her, so she said, "You're doing a great job."
We lie to ourselves. Very nice.
Well, unfortunately, there have been realtors that have given our industry a very bad name by their actions. And sometimes they feel like we're just above car salesmen. And so they use us out of necessity, but they still don't trust us. So it's a trust issue.
All right, can we take a little tangent here then? Ready? Which comes first, vulnerability or trust? Right? Trust, right? No. Vulnerability comes first. So did you notice I said something a little while ago? I said, all right, this is a closed group. We're here together. What was I trying to tell you guys? You guys can tell me the truth. This is a safe environment. You don't have to lie to me. Go ahead and tell me that you don't, if you really don't like to negotiate, right? That's what I was doing. When you show vulnerability, you get to see if the other person is trustworthy. Now, you don't want to be too vulnerable, right? I mean, so the definition of vulnerability is putting yourself in a situation where somebody can actually do damage to you because of information you share with them. So you got to be careful what you share. But you want to, let's say, chum the waters a little bit with some vulnerability to see how they react. Now, once again, you can steal money from old people doing that. But the idea is you begin to see, do they reciprocate with their own vulnerability? And what you will find is they will be more trusting of you when they see you can become vulnerable with them. And by you sharing, there's a human nature trait that says we tend to want to reciprocate when somebody gives us a gift. So when you give the gift of being vulnerable, not everybody, sociopaths and psychopaths, not so much, they will reciprocate in kind.
I would just, I mean, when I said trust comes first, is that they have to trust you before they become vulnerable.
That's true. You're right.
So you, by showing your vulnerability, allows them to trust first.
And you can wait for them to start the cycle instead, but you may be waiting a while or never. So that's why I said, go ahead and you be the one to say, for example, this may be a tough one. I'm not sure I can be persuasive enough for this. You see what I'm saying? You show that you've got the way I describe it is you show them the soft underbelly. You just make sure that they can't knife you, right? And you'll have those that will see that as a form of weakness. Have you ever had a customer or a client like that? You share something and then they use that against you? So be careful. And by the way, the science is very clear. If you will create a safe environment where they know that you won't reject them during this moment of vulnerability, it's much more likely that they will respond in the way you would like them to. But you have to create this safe environment that they know you're not going to reject them. You may not agree with them, so when we're talking about sympathy, the way I've had it described is sympathy is looking in the hole with a person in it and going, that's a tough situation you're in. Empathy is, I can only imagine what it would feel like to look up and know you can't get out. See the difference? I'm asking you to be empathetic, not sympathetic. And not demonstrate pity. You poor soul. Sucks to be you. Right? And compassionate is let's see if we can get a ladder for you. In your industry, you understanding who your client is should be job number one. What are their real desires? Not the superficial, what they told you, the first 2 minutes of the conversation. That may be it, but there may be some serious onions that need to be peeled to get to the heart of it. And you may not know at the beginning. It may change over time, but it's your job to do your best to understand where they're coming from. And then, of course, like we saw with the house that we purchased, understanding from the perspective of the seller made all the difference in that transaction. And sometimes it's just pure financial. Sometimes it's vanity. I know that comes across as, you guys never see that, I'm sure. Sometimes it's you telling your client, yeah, I'm not so sure that you can afford this. Right? That's you being vulnerable because they may can you. So empathy is an essential characteristic. So what do we do about that? I'm going to tell you two things. We're not going to have time to do it. These are really simple exercises. And I want you to do this with people that you trust. Okay? Ready? I'm going to give you a couple. Number one, it's called mirroring. Has anybody ever heard of mirroring? Very simple. You think it's very simple. This is, I wrote up there about Jedi mind trick. This is a Jedi mind trick. All you do is repeat the last 3, 2, or 1 words of what they just said. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with being empathetic? It's not enough for you to understand where they're at. They must understand that you understand. You have to make sure that they see that you are. Mirroring is how you do that. So you say something, so they say something like, well, and I want to have the garage about, 2, maybe 3. 2, maybe 3. And sometimes you don't even have to do the lift at the end. 2, maybe 3. And what you're doing is you're encouraging them to keep talking. So, for instance, Shauna, you said that sometimes the other agent will share things with you that they wouldn't share directly with the agent. So your ability to mirror would be highly important, right? Because you're encouraging them to keep talking. Negotiation is simply a word dance. And so the more, I shouldn't say word dance, an information dance. And so the more information that they can share that's relevant, the more likely you can be able to understand them and be empathetic. And so by saying the last 3, 2, or 1 words, you're encouraging them to share more. And when they do, what's their conclusion? You understand me. You understand me. So what's the problem with mirroring? Why doesn't everybody do it? Because you don't want to get caught, right? Because you feel like you're cheating. The beauty of it is they'll never know. I know you guys think that most people think that I'm full of it when I say that. It is almost impossible for you to pick up on it.
Doesn't your spouse pick it up on you?
Not usually. Every now and then she'll give me the eye, like I caught you, but not usually. Why? Why doesn't she pick up on it?
You went to BYU.
Yes. Right answer. No, because she's so happy that I actually showed some response. that she wants to keep talking.
So technically, she does know what you're doing. She just wants to keep talking with you.
Most of the time, no, she's so focused on making sure that she's understood that she's blind to me doing that. Has anybody ever read, I shouldn't pitch somebody else's book, but I'm going to. Has anybody ever read Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference? It's a good book. Not many of us have to deal with, hostage situations. So I think that sometimes it doesn't quite relate. But one of the things he talks about is one of his employees mirroring him for 45 minutes without him noticing. Here's the master of mirroring. And it was only his son that says, Dad, don't you see what he's doing? He's been mirroring you for 45 minutes. He just felt understood. So that's number one, mirroring. Next. So seriously, 3, 2, 1 words. That's it. Just the exact same words. And by the way, this is fantastic with teenagers. Fantastic. The one thing that they want to do is they want to be understood without telling you that they want to be understood. Number 2, labeling. Labeling is simply, let's call it a different application of the same concept. When you label, you are going to summarize what you think that they said. So generally, you'll use some introductory phrase like, it seems to me, I think what you're saying is, it appears to me, and it's important that you use those qualifiers. And then you say what you think that they said. What you're saying, so it seems to me you want to have a garage that's big enough for you to have three stalls so that you can park your boat. You're not looking for a yes, and this is from Chris Voss too. You're not looking for them to say yes, which is fine, but people will tell you yes to go away. So what you're really listening for is that's right. You want them to confirm that you got it right. 2 things happen subconsciously when you do this. Number 1, they feel understood again. And they know that you understand them. So those 2 things aren't very hard to do. Just practice with your kids or your spouse. And when you do that, you are exercising. So empathy is all great, but sometimes it's hard to, well, how do I show that I actually give, when I kind of don't, right? This is a way to do that. Repeat the last 3 words in mirroring. Summarize using a qualifier. Why is the qualifier important? It can come across as arrogant if you say, so you want to have you want to have a garage so you can be able to park your boat. When you say, it seems to me, you're being humble in saying I could be wrong. So, and it's important for me to make sure that I understand you to the point where I have it right. So,
Qualifiers. You said, seems to me that, it appears to me that, what are
I want to make sure that I understand. That would be another one. Please tell me if I'm wrong. And by the way, when you're doing that, you're also showing humility. You're also showing vulnerability because you're showing humility, that you could be wrong, which builds trust. Okay, 2 other things and then we'll wrap up. Here's another one on that same thing. Here's a way to ask a question in a way that's more likely to get a no, but you want to be told no. There is safety in saying no because you don't commit. So when you're interacting with somebody, oftentimes the best thing that you can do to get a confirmation and an actual commitment is to have them tell you no. Well, how does that work? You spin the conversation, and the easiest way to do this is, I know this may sound crazy, but would you X? Would you be okay if I? Would you be willing to whatever? By saying, and by the way, I use this all the time with the crazy phrase. I know this is crazy, but. And now, they're probably going to say yes when they may have said no, if it's close, simply because they don't want you to think you're crazy. Once again, stealing money from old people, so don't do it. But reversing that, and by the way, this comes from a business psychology professor from Arizona State. He wrote a great book. Here's another book. It's called Persuasion. He wrote a book decades ago called Influence, which was highly influential. Persuasion is it's probably 5 or 6 years old now. Excellent book for you guys. Excellent. His name is Robert Cialdini, Chalidini. Robert Cialdini, Arizona State professor. I think he's emeritus now. But anyway, that concept of helping them say no allows their defenses to come down. So, that's just another little idea. Okay. Chris Voss's book talks explicitly about tactical empathy. I want you to understand it is at the core of negotiation. There are some of these that are all kind of fluffy. Empathy is not fluff. You will become a much better agent if you can empathize with your client as well as what the other party is trying to get from the deal. Works with teenagers, works with kids, kinda, if anything can, and occasionally works with a spouse. Okay, before we wrap up, are there any other questions?
I'm still a little confused on this saying no thing. Like, you want them to say no. Because it sounded to me like your example that you said where you go, I know this is crazy, but
Would it be crazy if?
Oh, so there you want them to say, no, it's not
Yes,
crazy.
it's not crazy.
So yes, we'll do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is comfort in saying no. So oftentimes when you're trying to get through, let's say, the beginning, I told you that negotiation is an information dance. There's 2 parts to that. One of them is, call it the creativity part, right? You're trying to expand the pie of possible solutions. And then the second part is the dividing of the pie. Who gets what? So at that beginning part, you're not trying to offend or exclude. You're trying to encompass and incorporate everything. And you'll figure it out after. So by saying no, by them saying no, would it be crazy if you did this? No, that's not crazy. I can do that.
So let me just understand it better. So it seems like you have divided the negotiation process in 2 parts.
Yes.
And your first part is really where the entire process takes shape. Because if you go in a negotiation, so as a realtor, if my only binary again, if my only mode is, well, my client wants the smallest price, it doesn't take a genius to know that on the other side they want to maximize their profit. And so then it comes like head to head.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is, if I understood correctly, is that before you actually go in the negotiation of the price, but for example, what you have to do is the work that requires you to expand that universe so that then the negotiation is not just on the price, but then you can include the possession, things, this is this and this, and everything that you think will make a difference to the other side. Is that?
That is fantastic. That is a wonderful summary. Yes.
And so then you can negotiate those things because now.
Then you put the package together, right? Because what you're doing, and this is the reason why empathy is so important, is because now you can understand that there are more priorities than just the price. Because if it's simply an arm wrestle over the price, it's either yes or no.
That's right. That's it.
When do you ever walk away?
That is a great question. We don't have time to go into that, but I will say this. Every negotiation needs to have some type of a, if you're talking money, of course, you need to have a dollar where if you go behind, it's done. Now, the flip side of that is the negotiation is never over until the thing about which you are negotiating no longer exists. So the walk away, so everybody needs to have that number. And here's the very quick and easy. It's the point at which your plan B is equal to your plan A. So you don't want to have a bad deal. So you better understand. So what does that require? It requires you to have a plan B. What's your alternative? That's where BATNA comes from. What's your alternative to making a deal? And if you go below that number, then you walk away. At least until you renegotiate what that might look like. Now, sometimes you may find out that your facts were wrong, and so you need to adjust your value based on that. But if your facts are correct, if they don't come up to where you need to be, and you need to do that before you get in the negotiation, you need to understand that, then you walk away. And I go into that in great detail. Any other questions? Are you sure? Okay, so here's the deal. Next week, I've been working on a course for 7 years. I've been teaching it. I've been mentoring on it. I do one-on-one coaching with it. I do 2-day seminars on it. And I've had a lot of people tell me, hey, you need to record it. And so I've been working on that. And I'm finally publishing it next week. I'm going to show you a quick little video. It'll take 5 minutes, 4 minutes. It goes into a few things that I do. And I'm going to give you a code. Is it Fairway 1? Is that right? It is. It's not going to be active until the first of the week. I'm going to be selling it for $9.97. I'm going to be discounting it down to about $500. The material is all done, but some of the bells and whistles we're still working on it. We hope to have it, So I'm offering it to you guys with that code for $300. I promise you're the first group that I've actually shared this with. I've told people it's been coming for years. So I won't be offering that. I may offer it to a few more groups over the next week or two, but then that's gone. And I'm not trying to create urgency, which is what I did. I'm not trying to create urgency. I want people to have there's value to it, so I don't want to undercut it. If I gave it away, one thing that I remember as a lawyer was the worst clients that I ever had were those that I did pro bono work for because they didn't value it. When you see it, if you think after watching it you didn't get $300 of value, tell me, I'll give you your money back. But I want you to give me feedback. Tell me if you don't like it. Tell me if there are problems with it technically. And if, obviously if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Okay? It'll be at boldnegotiator.com. Don't try it right now because you may be able to purchase it at $9.97. Feel free. But there's still some kinks we're trying to work out. But next week, on Monday, if you use that code, you'll get it for $300. So here's... All right. Most of you know that I teach high-stakes negotiation to top executives and students worldwide. Working with thousands of professional clients and students, I've found a way to help the average student or person overcome obstacles and negotiate a better life. And after all, you don't get the life you want, you get the life you negotiate. Whether you're a business professional or a student or working from home, I respect your time, so I'll cut to the chase. Here are 3 simple steps to become a better negotiator this weekend. Number 1, know what you want. Second, face your fears. And finally, make the ask. So the first step is to know what you want. Like Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you want to go, it doesn't matter which plan you take. It helps to write yours down. And what deals do you want to make? What relationships do you want to improve? How do you want to live and work? Customize it to you. The O in bold stands for obstacles and opportunities. All obstacles have opportunities on the other side, and all opportunities have an obstacle in the way. Understanding that helps you get through to what is really important. And what obstacles do you see? What opportunities can come from them? It's okay to dream, but you must be realistic. Second, face your fears. The number one reason we don't get more of what we want is because we don't ask. Well, the simple question then is, why don't we ask? Well, we're worried about outcome. Whether we're rocking the boat or offending someone, we fear being rejected. And once we know what we want, we have to have the courage to face it. So how do we get past the fear? Write the fears down. Look at them. And then ask the tricky question, is it really that bad? How likely is it? And the answers may surprise you. Usually, the fear is unwarranted and exaggerated. If we face it head on, we usually find the risk is relatively small or highly unlikely. Once you understand that, it's easier to have confidence to ask. So now that we know what we want and understand the obstacles and fears in the way, it's time to make the ask. So follow the plan and be ready to adapt. And it's okay if someone tells you no. Most negotiations don't even start until after someone says no. And be brave. The conversation won't always go as planned, and that's okay. Oh, and whatever you do, don't cross the crazy line. That's where people don't just say no, they walk out of the negotiation. My extended courses teach you how to get more of what you want by getting closer to the crazy line without crossing it. Why don't you get what you want? What's your excuse? Well, those excuses in today. Because today I'm launching my course, The Bold Negotiator, to show you how. And you can do this no matter your situation or your personality type. Even the shyest introverts can learn to negotiate comfortably without awkward conversations and unnecessary compromise. You can still get what you want and be a great negotiator. The results for the executives that I've helped are hundreds of millions of dollars in additional value created. And my students are consistently some of the top negotiators in the country. So there you have it, folks. That's a glimpse of how to become a master bold negotiator. Do the work, make the plan, and you'll be glad you did. And if you want to learn more, click here for my free 1-hour training. I'm Phil Danielson, Harvard selected master negotiator and president of the Bold Negotiator. It's your time to be bold. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. I appreciate Charlotte to allowing me to meet with you guys. You guys are a great group. Thank you.